All right, we're going to welcome our next live guest this morning. We've got Mike Bush with us from Next Trucking down in LA. Mike, thank you for joining us. And as Anthony mentioned, we're talking about spreadsheets today. And I think when people say spreadsheets, your face just like glazes over and you're like, why are you still using spreadsheets to run your entire business?
Question to start with, right? Today, 2/3 of carriers on the road are using a spreadsheet as their TMS. It's their overall solution, and it's creating issues with accuracy. It's creating issues with efficiency, and it's creating issues with opportunity. You know, if you break down the way a carrier is working right now, they're making things way harder than they need to. Whether that means, hey, I'm bringing in somebody to actually like scan documents and PODs as they're returned, whether it means having somebody go through spreadsheets and data that's been entered like manually to identify here's the billing that we need, here's what the information we need to provide carriers or to shippers, right? Like Next works in drayage a lot, and we know our shippers really have 4 things they want to know. Is my container available for pickup? Has it been outgated? Has it been delivered? And when will the container get returned to the port? Carriers that are relying on spreadsheets are in a position where every one of those milestones requires either a phone call, a text message. There's some sort of person on the back end saying, hey, where are you? To a carrier saying, and it's creating friction across the place. And it's definitely based entirely on the fact that spreadsheets are the TMS of choice right now.
Mike, when we think about this, are there levels to this on really the use of spreadsheets depending on the mode for the carrier? So are drive-in and reefer going to differ a little bit from flatbed operators and carriers?
Yeah, Anthony, that's a great question. I think it's pretty consistent across the board. The idea is basically, if you're a smaller carrier, you're looking for ways theoretically to cut costs, right? Like, and when you say, hey, Google Sheets are free, there's no cost to them. In reality, you run into the costs, and it's costs of efficiency. It's costs of making sure you've got somebody who's doing the manual data entry. It's challenges with opportunity as well, I think. And this is the one to me that I would, where spreadsheets are really a challenge is if you look at today's shipper and today's modern shipper, they want certain things. They want track and trace. And as shipping has really become to digitize, we've seen things like EDI and API integration become really critical. No matter what carrier you are, if you're a smaller company relying on spreadsheets, you're going to get to a point where you cannot accept or ingest orders from the shippers you're hoping to work with. So that, that's a universal problem for the shipping industry.
And Mike, I want to look at this also from a broker perspective. If you're a broker who's still relying on maybe spreadsheets to keep just your life straight, that's one thing, right? But if you're using it to actively facilitate communication or even saying, hey, you know what, let's get onto my spreadsheet and work with this outside of the TMS that we're supposed to be using with both a carrier and a shipper, that's really disadvantageous, I guess is how you say it, from the work that you could be doing, right? Because it can really just add on to your back-end processes as a broker as well.
Oh, absolutely, Kaylee. I think, when you look at it, and there are a lot of brokers who are relying on Google spreadsheets where they say, okay, I've populated this spreadsheet. Let me push it out to a carrier and let them manage it. And at that point, you're handing it over to somebody outside of your control to say, okay, here's the information I need you to provide. Here are the, here's opportunity for error, right? Like if it's, hey, the container's been outgated or a load is on the way, but you don't know exactly where it is. Maybe that person on the back end is populating incorrectly. Maybe there's, it could be very simple human error. It could be something, more diabolical, if you will, to say, hey, yeah, of course he's going to be there on time, only to find out that the trucker is perhaps a little off the pace that they should be on.
So Mike, we've chatted about it now, spreadsheets, not as efficient as a lot of people might want them to be, and really it's just, I think, the default because everyone seems to be somewhat familiar with them, even if they all share the same hatred for them. But what is the proposed method of really kind of getting away from spreadsheets and really kind of getting into a space where we can be a lot more, I guess, proactive, efficient, and connected?
Yeah, I know my friends at Metaphora would punish me for this one because, they've got friends don't let friends TMS. But I think the argument is to try something, to look at a TMS. You don't need to invest in a $4,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 a year solution. You can have very basic track and trace, very basic data upload or document upload and simple connections to your billing. Next recently opened up our portal to say if you're a carrier and you want to take advantage of our portal, dispatching your trucks and uploading documents, we're letting carriers do that for free. And certainly we're not the only company doing it. When you search for freemium TMS, you'll find a bunch of solutions out there that are trying to make it easier for drivers to connect with the shippers that ultimately, need goods moved.
And Mike, this is something that I think is really important to talk about too, is that when you're talking about a owner operator, maybe you're a single driver who is running all of your entire freight and you don't have the time to be that back end process. You don't have the time to sit there on a spreadsheet, especially while you're actively driving, right? So you need that back end process. If you are someone who is maybe a one-man band or a 1 or 2 person shop, how can you go in and how can you say, you know what, okay, I really need to invest in just a little bit more than just the baseline of the Google Sheet?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, right? Like the first question is, how often are your bills accurate? Open Envoy published a statement that said 1 out of every 3 bills that's sent from a trucking company is inaccurate. So if you're the little guy, you have to assume you're not going to get the benefit of the doubt with a procurement team or with the AP team. They're going to be more aggressive in making sure everything is accurate. That means they're probably going to increase your time to pay. So while there's some discussion of, look, is there a little bit of an upfront fee or some costs associated with trying something new? Probably at the same time, you're talking about being paid faster, you're being more accurate billing, you're getting tremendous opportunities, even if you're a one-man band.
And Mike, you just mentioned something, that payment upfront. Do you think that's the biggest resistance to really kind of implementing some type of technology like a TMS? Or do you think potentially that a learning curve might also be one as well?
Anthony, I know there's this statement out there that truckers aren't necessarily technologically sophisticated. And I've heard it over and over again, and I have to push back on it. If you think about the first people to build a mobile office or the first people to live in a tiny home, truckers were doing that way before we were, right? Like they were super into this and making cool stuff happen that 20 years later, we're looking around as the rest of us going, hey, that's not a bad idea. I think there is a little bit of a technical curve. I think part of it is that there's cost, and part of it is just this is the way we've always done it, right? There's some inertia in the space that realistically will be flushed out of the system as more shippers require EDI, API, real-time updates, et cetera. If I'm a one-man band or a smaller company, especially if a one-man band, like how do I provide an update from the road to say I'm running on time? Theoretically, we don't want drivers texting while driving. We don't want drivers calling. All of these back office automations, all of these processes can be automated very simply in order to make shippers happier, in order to get truckers paid faster, and in order to make things smoother across the supply chain.
So Mike, how long do you think that it is before these folks who are unwilling to make a change get pushed out of the industry? Is that coming sooner rather than later? Or do you think that there is still time for people to play a little bit of catch up and get involved?
Oh, I think there's a lot of time to play catch up. When you think of kind of the shipping ecosystem, it's just as fragmented as the driving side, right? So, I know the rule is 90% of carriers on the road are part of a small fleet, but we have to also consider that every company has its own approach to supply chain. There are still massive companies out there that are relying on spreadsheets and saying this is the way we're going to do it for the time being. But what they're learning is and seeing is over time, those spreadsheets and that reliance is making things harder for every step of a container journey or of a shipment's journey, at which point somebody along the way will say, okay, this is crazy. What are we doing?
Mike, thanks so much for joining us this morning. And you really, I think, highlighted a really big issue that not a lot of people want to talk about or really face up to on their day-to-day basis, especially with those spreadsheets. If people want to reach out to you, how can they do that?
Nexttrucking.com or on Twitter, just @MikeBush.
There you go, easy enough. All right, Mike, thank you for joining us. We'll talk to you again soon, I'm sure. Right now, Cindy is back with our next look at the top stories on freightwaves.com.